We're going to look at the true story behind Thanksgiving, according to the Pilgrims themselves. It can be found in Governor William Bradford's book of Plymouth Plantation. Not the dark communistic twist of stolen land by white people, but an incredible true story of how God paved the way for a Christian people to plant the seeds of liberty and faith. You will see a chain of events so unlikely, the only reasonable conclusion is God did it. Let's walk through this. And once you hear it laid out clearly, you will never see Thanksgiving the same way again. All right, let's be clear. This is the story of the Pilgrims, Plymouth Rock, and Thanksgiving. Do not mix this up with the story of John Smith and Jamestown. That is a different story, a different time, and they had a different mission. The Pilgrims were going to settle near northern Virginia. They did not want to be a part of Jamestown, but they wanted to be close enough by ship if they needed anything. But on their way there, in the middle of the Atlantic, a violent storm slammed into the Mayflower, and it blew it hundreds of miles north of their destination. By the time the storm was finished, the ship wasn't anywhere near Virginia. They were pushed up into Cape Cod, into a region they had never planned to enter. Now think about this. A storm strong enough to change their entire destination. A ship full of people who believed God guided every step, and they ended up in the one exact spot God wanted them to be. The Pilgrims wrote later that God directed their voyage for his purposes. And they were right, because what they were about to find was nothing short of miraculous. When they reached what we now call Plymouth, they discovered something strange. There in the middle of New England, in wild forest land, the Pilgrims found cleared fields, open farmland, fresh water, food storage pits, even abandoned homes, and healthy soil. No trees to cut down, no land to clear. It was ready for them. Now, if that isn't crazy enough, here's the extraordinary part. The people who had once lived there, the Patuxet tribe, they were gone. Not chased out, not conquered, but wiped out a few years before by a terrible disease. Historians estimate that up to 90% of the native population in coastal New England died in the epidemic of 1616 to 1619. The Pilgrims did not bring that disease. It happened years before they arrived. They walked into what the Governor William Bradford described as God cleared a space for us where once multitudes had lived. Edward Winslow, one of the Pilgrims on site and future governor of the area, kept a journal, and he gave graphic details of bodies not buried, bones left inside homes, and mounds of bones where a large number of the deceased were placed. So the Pilgrims did not pillage or conquer. They arrived to a Patuxet land void of Patuxet people. And when you look at the timing, the location, and the fact that the Pilgrims were blown directly to that exact spot, the word coincidence becomes utterly laughable, and it is impossible to ignore the hand of God upon this Christian movement to the new land. Now, here's where the true story becomes almost unreal. The Pilgrims arrived in a foreign land. They did not know the terrain, the climate, the crops, the hunting patterns, the dangers. They were weak, they were sick, and they were exhausted from a brutal winter.
What are we going to do, Ma?
And then enters a man named Squanto. Squanto's story is almost unbelievable unless you believe God is in control. Years earlier, before the Pilgrims ever set foot in America, Squanto was kidnapped by an English explorer and sold into slavery. He was taken across the ocean to Spain, then to England. He was freed by Christian monks. He learned perfect English. He lived with Englishmen. He traveled across Europe, and eventually, years later, he found a passage back home. But when he returned to his village, the Patuxet, everyone he knew had died in the epidemic. His tribe no longer existed, and Squanto settled in the exact region where the Pilgrims would later land. So when the Pilgrims stepped into the New England area, suddenly, unexpectedly, blown off course by a storm, there was one man, literally one, on the entire coast of New England who spoke English. There was only one man who understood English agriculture, English customs, and what the Pilgrims needed. And he was standing right there. William Bradford wrote, "Squanto was a special instrument sent of God for our good." And he was. He taught them how to plant corn in New England soil, how to fish local waters, how to fertilize the crops with fish, how to find food in winter, how to survive. Without him, most historians agree the Pilgrims would probably not have lived. Too many coincidences to ignore. Let's recap this. A storm blows the Mayflower off course into the only area in New England with cleared farmland. That farmland not occupied or being used because a mysterious epidemic wiped out the people before the Pilgrims got there. The only surviving member of that tribe had been captured, taken to Europe, taught English, and returned home, the very place a storm put the Pilgrims. You can call it coincidence, but the Pilgrims didn't. They called it Providence. They called it God's hand. They described it as God going before them, God preparing a place for them. This is their words, not mine. Just as he led Abraham, just as he led Israel, just as he leads people today. Thanksgiving isn't just a historical moment. It is a picture of God's faithfulness, a reminder that he works through storms, tragedy, and even impossible circumstances to accomplish his plans. When the Pilgrims held that first 3-day feast with their Indian neighbors, they weren't celebrating victory. They weren't celebrating conquest. They weren't celebrating wealth or security. They were celebrating survival and God's mercy and providence. They thanked God for life after death, food after starvation, peace after fear, a home after wandering, and the miracles that brought them there. Thanksgiving was and still is a story about God guiding his people. So the next time someone tries to twist the Thanksgiving story or call it a myth or a lie or even racist, remember the real story. The story the actual Pilgrims wrote in their daily journals. Remember the way God orchestrates everything behind the scenes. Because this story isn't just about pilgrims and tribes. It's about God's providence. God prepares the way long before we walk it. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody, and Merry Christmas to you and your family. Help keep Truth in the Dark shining. Just $5 a month. Hit Buy Me a Coffee in the description. If it wasn't needed, I wouldn't ask.